I was driving through the Grand Canyon National Park in Arizona, USA, in the middle of a terrible snowstorm in 2013. As a park ranger, I knew the roads like the back of my hand, but the visibility was so low that I missed my turn and ended up on a deserted dirt road. I was starting to get worried. I had never been on this road before, and my phone had no signal. The snow was falling so heavily that I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. I was about to turn back when I saw something moving in the distance. At first, I thought it was a bear, but as I got closer, I realized that it was far too tall and covered in fur to be any ordinary animal. My heart pounding in my chest, I slowly approached the creature, trying not to startle it. As I got closer, I could see that it was a massive humanoid creature with long, shaggy fur covering its entire body. Its arms were disproportionately long and had a massive chest and shoulders. I could hardly believe my eyes. It was a Bigfoot. I tried to back away, but my car was stuck in the snow. The Bigfoot didn't seem to notice me at first, as it was busy digging through the snow for something to eat. But when it finally turned around and saw me, I froze in terror. The creature's eyes were piercing, and it seemed to stare straight through me. I could feel its powerful presence even from inside my car. I tried to start the engine, but it wouldn't budge. I was completely trapped. The Bigfoot took a step toward me, and I could feel the ground shake beneath me. It was easily twice my height, and I knew that if it wanted to, it could crush my car like a tin can. I was completely at its mercy. But then, something strange happened. The Bigfoot seemed to pause, as if considering me. It cocked its head to one side and studied me intently. And then it spoke. Its voice was deep and rumbling, and it sounded like nothing I had ever heard before. "You are lost," it said, "but you do not need to fear me." I couldn't believe my ears. The Bigfoot was talking to me. "I have been watching you for some time," it continued. "You are a protector of this land, and you have shown respect to all creatures, great and small. I respect you for that." I was speechless. I had heard stories of Bigfoot sightings before, but I had never believed them to be anything more than myths. And yet, here I was, face to face with one of the most legendary creatures in all of the cryptozoology. The Bigfoot seemed to sense my fear, and it took a step back, as if to reassure me. "I mean you no harm," it said, "but you must leave this place. The storm is growing worse, and you are not safe here." I nodded, too stunned to speak. The Bigfoot turned around and disappeared into the snowstorm, leaving me alone on the deserted road. As soon as it was gone, my car started without a problem, and I quickly turned around and made my way back to safety. I couldn't believe what had just happened. Had I really just met a Bigfoot? When I returned to the park station, I immediately reported what had happened to my superiors. They listened to my story with skepticism, but I could tell that they were intrigued. To this day, I am still not sure what to make of my encounter with the Bigfoot. Was it real or just a hallucination brought on by the stress of the storm? I still remember the chilly night when I experienced something that still sends shivers down my spine. As a park ranger, I was responsible for patrolling a remote area of the park, which was known to be a popular spot for hikers and campers. However, that night, I was the only person on duty, and the stillness of the woods around me was almost eerie. I was busy scanning the area when I suddenly saw something that made me freeze. In the distance, I saw a ranger approaching me on horseback. I quickly waved at him, relieved to see another human presence in the area. However, as the rider and horse got closer, they suddenly vanished without a trace. It was like they had disappeared into thin air. I rubbed my eyes, thinking that I might be hallucinating, but when I opened them, the rider was nowhere to be seen. It was as if he had never existed in the first place. At first I thought that it might have been my imagination playing tricks on me, but the sight of the rider was too vivid to be ignored. I decided to investigate the incident further, hoping to find some answers to this paranormal experience. I talked to my colleagues about what had happened, and that was when I learned about the legend of the Phantom Ranger. The story goes that many years ago, a ranger was on patrol in the same area where I had seen the rider. He had been on horseback patrolling the area when he was ambushed by a group of poachers. Despite putting up a brave fight, the ranger was killed and his body was never found. Ever since that tragic incident, there have been numerous sightings of the Phantom Ranger, who is said to appear on horseback and vanish into thin air, just like I had witnessed. The locals believe that the ranger's spirit still wanders in the woods, seeking justice for his untimely death. As I delved deeper into the legend, I started experiencing more unexplained incidents. I would hear footsteps behind me, but when I turned around, there would be no one there. The air around me would suddenly become cold, even on the hottest days, and I would feel a strange presence around me. The most unnerving experience I had was when I was returning to the ranger station one night. I heard the sound of hooves approaching me from behind. When I turned around, I saw the Phantom Ranger on horseback, looking straight at me. For a moment I froze, unsure of what to do. The rider then rode past me, disappearing into the woods, just like he had done on the first night I saw him. Despite the fear that the legend of the Phantom Ranger instilled in me, I was also curious to know more about the ranger's tragic story. I spent several days researching old records and interviewing locals who had lived in the area for generations. Finally, I found an old newspaper clipping that told the story of the ranger's murder. It had been a brutal ambush, and the ranger had fought valiantly before succumbing to his injuries. The clipping also mentioned that the poachers had been caught and sentenced to life imprisonment, but the ranger's body had never been found. As I read the story, I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for the ranger who had lost his life so tragically. I also couldn't help but wonder if his spirit was still wandering the woods, seeking justice for his untimely death. In the end, my experience with the Phantom Ranger taught me that there are still mysteries in this world that we can't explain. Perhaps the spirit of the ranger still lingers in the woods, seeking justice for his death. I was a seasoned park ranger, used to spending long periods of time alone in the wilderness. So when I was assigned to a remote cabin deep in the woods, I was excited for the solitude and adventure that lay ahead. The cabin was rustic but cozy, with a fireplace to keep me warm and a well-stocked pantry to keep me fed. But as the days passed, I began to notice strange things happening. At first it was just small things, like doors opening and closing on their own. I brushed it off as the wind or my imagination, but the occurrences continued. Then I started hearing footsteps in the hallway when I knew I was the only one there. I tried to recognize what I was experiencing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the cabin. And then the temperature started dropping in certain spots, even when the fire was roaring and the thermostat was set to a comfortable temperature. One night, I was awoken by a loud banging on the front door. I jumped out of bed and cautiously made my way to the door, but when I looked through the peephole, there was no one there. I was beginning to feel uneasy and wondered if I should request to be relocated. As the days went on, the activity in the cabin escalated. I would wake up to find objects moved or even missing altogether. The footsteps grew louder and more frequent, and the cold spots became more pronounced. One evening, I decided to conduct an experiment. I set up a camera in the living room and left the cabin to take a walk. When I returned, I reviewed the footage, and to my horror, I saw the doors opening and closing on their own, as well as objects moving across the room. I knew then that I couldn't explain away the strange occurrences any longer. The cabin was haunted. But why? Who or what was causing this activity? I decided to research the history of the cabin and discovered that it had been built on land that was once home to a Native American tribe. According to legend, the tribe had been forced to leave their land by settlers and cursed the land before they left. Could this curse be the reason for the paranormal activity? I wasn't sure, but I knew I had to get out of there. I requested to be relocated, and a few days later I packed up my things and left the cabin for good. I never returned to that cabin, but the experience stayed with me. I wondered if the curse still haunted the land and if others who had stayed in the cabin had experienced similar activity. Years later, I heard rumors that the cabin had been torn down and a new one had been built in its place. But the rumors also said that the strange occurrences had continued and that the curse still lingered on the land. I couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness and unease at the thought of that haunted cabin and the land it was built on. The wilderness may be beautiful, but it can also be a place of darkness and mystery where the past can haunt us long after we've left it behind. I was a park ranger at Grand Canyon National Park in 2009. It was a job that I loved, and I felt incredibly fortunate to be able to spend my days surrounded by such natural beauty. But one day, I had an encounter that I will never forget. It was a typical day in the park, and I was doing my rounds, checking on trails, and making sure everything was in order. I was walking along a path that led to a popular lookout point when I heard something strange. It was a rustling in the bushes, like something was moving through them. I stopped and listened, thinking it might be an animal. But as the rustling grew louder, I began to feel uneasy. It wasn't like any animal I had ever encountered in the park before. And then suddenly, it stopped. I cautiously continued down the path, my heart racing. As I approached the lookout point, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing there watching me. It was tall and thin with long arms and legs, and its eyes glowed in the darkness. At first, I thought it might be a hiker who had gotten lost or injured, but as I got closer, I realized that this was no ordinary person. Its face was twisted and distorted, and it had sharp teeth that gleamed in the moonlight. I had heard stories from other rangers about the skinwalker, a creature from Navajo legend that could take on the form of any animal or person it chose. But I had never believed in such things. Now, as I stood face to face with this monstrous creature, I knew that there was no denying its existence. The skinwalker didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with its glowing eyes. I could feel its malevolent energy radiating off of it, and I knew that I was in danger. I slowly backed away, hoping to make it back to the safety of the park headquarters. But the skinwalker was faster than I had anticipated. It lunged at me, and I felt its sharp claws tear into my flesh. I screamed and fought back, but it was like trying to fight a ghost. The skinwalker was everywhere and nowhere at once, moving with a speed and agility that seemed impossible. I knew that I was no match for this creature, but I refused to give up. I ran as fast as I could, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel the skinwalker's breath on my neck, its claws tearing at my clothes. Finally, I burst through the trees and into the clearing that surrounded the park headquarters. I collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath. The skinwalker was gone, but I could still feel its presence lingering in the air. For weeks after that encounter, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the skinwalker's twisted face and glowing eyes. I knew that I had been lucky to survive, but I also knew that I could never let my guard down again. I spoke to other rangers about what had happened, and while some of them were skeptical, others had their own stories to tell. They had heard the howls of wolves that sounded more like human screams. They had seen strange figures moving through the trees at night. I knew that I would never forget my encounter with the skinwalker. It was a reminder that there are forces in this world that are beyond our understanding. And it was a reminder that even in a place as beautiful as Grand Canyon National Park, there are dangers that lurk in the darkness.